what? Sure, I'm in Discord now. Oh, okay, World Star. What's your name in Discord? Is it just World Star? Or is it AZ? Is this you? World Stars in Discord. Name is AZ. Relevant is black? No, I'm white. Young one.
Can you hear me?
I can.
How's it sound?
Sounds alright.
Alright, man. So,
First off, can I ask you, what brought you to my stream? Because you have 70 messages inside of my stream, and you don't think trans women are women. So I'm wondering where you came from. What's your story, friend?
I'm not sure how I found your stream, but I mean, I enjoy your content generally, but yeah, I definitely don't agree with all your takes. Doesn't stop me from enjoying it. Doesn't stop me from enjoying it, though.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I like your dissenting opinions.
Cool. All right. So let's talk about trans women then. Why don't you think trans women are women?
Well, just from, I mean, I guess you were just talking about societal experiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, someone growing up as a woman,
Mm-hmm.
is going to have drastically different experiences than
Yep.
someone growing up as a man. For instance, just on like a safety level, right? Going to a bar, worrying about you're drinking roofied, walking
Yep.
home late at night. These are totally different lived experiences, and that's just not. I mean, granted, you could say that's true for a lot of trans people too, but there's a clear distinction.
What is so I'm just wondering, what is your definition of a woman that does not allow trans women to be it?
I would say that biology is certainly a key factor.
Okay, so then
Um,
I don't know why then we started talking about societal stuff if it's biology, right?
well, that's because it's a combination of them too, right?
Okay, so then can you add on top of what biologically, what are we talking about when we're talking societally?
Okay, sure. So outside of reproductive um, physiology,
Mm-hmm.
like I just said about society, about the the way in which you're raised, the lived experiences you have, right, and the way you interact in society. A large part of that is based on your sex and your gender.
Okay. So do you recognize
And
that there's a difference between sex and gender?
sure,
Okay.
but
What is gender then?
um, gender is more of a like a sociological construct, I guess.
Okay,
Um,
can you describe to me what makes somebody a gender versus another gender? Let's take a man versus a woman.
sure, it would ultimately be down to I mean, I guess it would just be how that person feels uh, insofar as what gender they are. Um,
So would you say that I can change my gender in regards to
I
how
mean,
I feel?
if you are having experiences in your life that maybe make you realize that you are identifying a different way, then yeah, I would
Mm-hmm.
say so. Um, yeah, sure, but I mean that's a pretty you know,
Okay, well, you just kind of described being trans.
no, it's not the same. It's absolutely not the
Okay,
same.
what's the
You
difference?
can be okay. Well, look, you can say that. Oh, yeah, now I identify as non-binary, binary, or whatever. But that doesn't give you a lifetime of experiences where
Mm-hmm.
you've been in that sort of that
Mm-hmm.
position as say a female or a
Do you
woman in society.
I'm sorry. Do you think that trans people would claim that they have a lifetime experiences of being a woman? Or do you think by the very nature of the recognition that they have to transition in some way, shape, or form, they are recognizing that they haven't been treated as a woman or a man, whatever they choose to transition to? I would say that the very nature of transitioning is the recognition that they haven't been treated the way that they want to be treated, and that is in reference to how their
Sure,
gender of choice wants
they
to be
can
treated.
think that all they want. It doesn't make it true. I mean, you can say that you haven't been treated that way, and that's how you should be treated. But you still haven't been treated that way, and therefore you don't have those lived experiences, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore you do not have uh, the experience of growing up
Yeah.
and being a woman and treated as a woman.
Yeah, and they agree with you. I'm not sure
Sure,
if you
sure.
heard.
So surely there's a clear distinction between women and trans women if that's the case, right?
Yeah,
If we're saying
hold on.
that, you know,
I no trans woman will disagree with you that there is a difference between cis women and trans women, which by and large includes the socialization of cis women as women early on in their life. And no trans woman will disagree with you about that. But that doesn't affect whether or not they're women. That affects whether or not they're cis women. You understand?
okay, well, I guess you're just so you're making a distinction between cis woman and woman.
Every single trans advocate will make the difference between cis women and trans women. Every single
Okay,
one.
well,
I
at least
promise you.
in the colloquial sense, I mean, when you say they're women, people are thinking cis women. I mean, that's just the vernacular that's used in society. I mean, that's just how it is. That's what when you say woman, that's what you think.
What,
At least,
cis women is what you're referring to?
yes, and I would say for
Sure. And I
99.999%.
think I think there's a lot of people that are trying to change that.
Sure, but I mean, it, it doesn't necessarily. I mean, I don't see the point in that though. Well,
I mean,
like,
why not?
because we already have a word for that. It's called trans woman. You know, you don't have to change women to cis women. You can just stick with trans women
Well,
and
it's
call them a
just
trans woman. I mean, you already
hold
have
on.
that word.
What would we call black men? My Discord, not yours. Would we call black men, or should we just call them men?
It depends on the context. If their race is important for the discussion,
Right.
then
And I don't disagree with you. And I think in a lot of situations, the gender specificity as to whether or not they're cis or trans is not really relevant. That's why I would call trans women women. That's why I've called the trans man inside of this.
how is it not
feminist
relevant? How is it not relevant if it's depicting two entirely different sets of lived experiences
because
that
in a lot of
are
situations that
mad?
doesn't. So, for instance, right? If we're talking about like somebody, let's talk about the feminist, the man inside the trans man inside of this video right here, right? A lot of us called them a man, and I'm probably going to continue to call them a man because there's a lot of this. A lot of the context is not going to be relevant to point out that they're trans. It's like I don't go around saying like, oh yeah, this black man, this black man, this black man, this black man, because it's like, that's not relevant. In a lot of cases, whether or not they're trans or cis just isn't really going to matter. The only thing that really matters is honestly the pronoun usage in the English grammar, in sentence structure. That's what
Sure,
really
yeah,
matters.
you're not doing it out of kindness, right? So I have no problem, right? If someone is trans and they want to be called man or woman instead of like trans, that's fine. I'll say that to appease them because it's kind of a dick move not to, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I think it's the same thing.
I don't think. Okay, let me put it this way: if you meet people that are saying that trans women and cis women have the same experiences and are exactly the same in every way, shape, and form,
Sure, sure.
those people are batshit insane, and I
Sure, but
promise you, there's a
okay,
group of
but
people
that's
who are more
okay.
reasonable.
Yeah, and that's exactly how it comes across when you say trans woman or woman. Don't you see that's the message that's being emitted there
I
when you
don't.
say that?
I
That
so
that's kind of what's
I
getting put
don't
out.
really, because I would say black men are men, but black men have a severely different experience being a man than white men. So I personally don't view it that way. I think your view is understandable. I don't think it's congruent with the way we look at aggregates in our day-to-day life. For instance, let's talk about a Muslim man's life inside of the United States after 9/11 compared to a white man's life. We would say these are eons apart, right? Or a black man's life in the 1700s compared to a white man's life. They can have massively contextual differences, but they're both men. They can have massively different contextual differences to how they're going to operate in day-to-day society, but they're both still men. You understand? One is literally a slave that can't do anything, that can't own property, that could be beaten and raped or killed, literally, and nobody will care. And the other one can own slaves, beat them, kill them, and and lynch them if
Sure.
they wish.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
like,
I mean, you
my
can
point.
factor people into any amount of traits, and you can group them in all sorts of ways. It doesn't matter because
Well,
I think it's a false comparison.
no. My point is that just making the appeal that people have two different lived experiences but share the same title, being that being unjust because they care such.
But if someone is a Muslim in
Mhm.
America after 9/11, and then they saying that they're a white man, that would be a more apt analogy than than what you're saying. Just saying man. No, it'd be more specific than that. It would be them saying that they're a white man. So
No,
that would
no,
be
no, no, no.
more
My
an apt
my point.
analogy.
You're missing my point. My point. The reason why I brought this up is to address the fact that in your mind, or at least the way you communicated it, you were talking about how unapt it feels to be able to call trans women women because they have such different experiences than cis women. Why would we call black men men when it comes to, for instance, the time when they were slaves? Why would we call black men men and white men men? Because they have such severely different experiences. Can you suss that out, why
Yeah.
we would say that?
Yeah, sure, because they, they have different experiences in regards to their race. But as far as being a man, they have very similar
They
experiences.
don't.
Really?
Yeah, a black man who is a yes does not have the same.
I'm talking about strictly in regards to their sex. The
Yes,
experience.
as a black man who is a is going to have a severely different social context growing up for their ability to actualize any kind of manly duties or obligations in comparison to a white man. Yeah, because let's say the black man is not going to be able to get educated, try and work a job to be able to afford for their
I
family.
mean, are those
Into
traits exclusive to being a man though? Getting educated and getting. I mean, is that
at
exclusive to being
the
a man?
time, a lot of that responsibility was onto the man. Yeah, that was pretty harsh gender roles in the 1700s.
I mean, if we're talking about, I mean, you can see the distinction. I'm sure that they are doing more physical labor things, right? The men, as opposed as to the women, right? There's clear delineations between the sexes in your scenario, and where you would still see how that, being a man is it's not. I guess it has to do with the experiences being of that sex. And so yes, a black man and a white man will have very drastically different
So,
experiences. But
yeah, my point is the way that you're socialized as a man is going to depend on your social context, right? Quite
yeah,
dramatically, right? And so, if you're in the instance of a slave, it's going to be massively different than in your instance of being not a slave. And so just appealing to socialization of being X, Y, and Z, I don't think is sufficient, because then you'd have to draw a firm line. In what way does the socialization matter and manifest to such a degree that we would no longer feel it apt to call them men, right? I mean, and you had people at the time doing this. They literally, a lot of these people wouldn't refer to black people as like human. So because they agree with the idea that like they were born into some kind of savagery, and they were socialized into some kind of savagery as well. So I need a justification as to why that difference in socialization, or the difference in we could bring it back to biology if you need, would result in us not being able to, in some contexts, call them women. I'm not even arguing in every context we cannot delineate between trans women and cis women. I'm just arguing that, like, in a lot of contexts, it's just not relevant to make a differentiation. You're the guy going into the room and just saying, like, trans man, trans man, trans man. Yeah, this trans man. Yeah, that trans man over there. It's like, why is that relevant? We're asking about whether or not they want coffee.
okay, yeah. If you have to make a distinction, though, then can't you see how you can't just make a blanket statement saying that trans men or trans women are women? Like, you can't make that.
I
If you
think you
have
can.
all these little asterisks next to it and make a little distinction saying, oh well, maybe it's not relevant here, but sometimes
So
it's relevant here. We're talking about
okay,
childbirth or whatever.
hold on.
It's
And
relevant here, but no,
no, hold
it's
on.
like
Then no,
you can't make a blanket statement
I think
with
you
all
can.
that.
I think you can. I think you can make a generalized statement. Would you say that, for
Sure,
instance,
you'd have footnotes.
would you?
This,
Okay,
like,
let me put it this. Can I give you an example? Would you say that men were dominant in the 1700s over women?
sure. I mean, I'm not a historian, but
Sure. So, with that being the case, would you say then whether or not they are black men or white men was probably pretty relevant to their availability to be dominant over women?
Uh, Not necessarily. I mean, in some contexts, yes, but
Okay. How
but
readily available do you think black men were to be able to be dominant over most women in
okay, so
comparison to
most
white
women.
men?
Okay, what? Okay, well, are you are you talking about black men on like a plantation? Is that what you're referring to?
I'm talking like a lot of the sorry, I'm talking about in the context of America, if that's what you're asking. So, yeah, a lot of them would be slaves, not necessarily
Okay,
just plantations specifically.
oh yeah, okay, we'll talk about. Um, so I mean, I'm not as familiar, with the era, but those black men live with the black women.
In some cases,
They're procreating with them.
if the white people let them, yeah,
Right, but obviously they're procreating with them, right? That's why
sure.
we're
But there's
descendants of them, right?
sure.
So do you not think that there was a dynamic there, with a man versus female dynamic in
Yeah,
that context,
for
where,
sure. I don't, yeah, 100%. But that was not of necessarily the black man's ability to be able to choose or enact that kind of authority. It was literally at the behest of like their white owners, if they
sure,
would do that.
he doesn't have to choose. It's just his lived experiences. It's just,
No,
he has
no,
certain experiences of being a man,
no,
right?
no.
It's not
It's
like he's like choosing
it's
that.
the lived experience of somebody that has to be at the beck and call of another person, right? They don't have the same authority as like a white dude, presumably, at the time could more or less find a whole host of women or women even, but white women or non-white women or whatever to be
And
able to.
also, okay, let's just let me
Mhm.
just say this. You're using a very specific example in which a group has little to no autonomy, that's 300 years old. I really don't think that is analogous. I don't think it
So
holds up today
no,
to today's
the
argument.
principle, the
I think it's,
principle, the
I
principle
understand the
holds.
principle, what you're trying to say,
Yeah.
that they had that, it's not just the lived experiences or whatever, but I don't think that holds true. I don't think you can hold it to the same.
I'm not trying to say that the situation is analogous to now. What I'm trying to say is in response to your statement, which was simple. All right. We can't call trans women women because they share such a differing lived experience to cis women that we can't call them women. That's your claim. If it is
Uh,
not,
no,
then
that's one part of it.
okay, that's the part that I'm talking about right now.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And I believe that I can point to many different points in time, including literally 9/11 as well. I don't have to go 300 years back. I go to 9/11 and talk about Muslim men versus white men and the autonomy that they have and the fact that there was tons of Muslim men who are getting monitored and spied on just by the very nature of being Middle Eastern, or in some cases their religion, I'll grant, right? That would be spied on just by the very nature of that you didn't really have to worry about as much if you were non-Muslim. Even many black men wouldn't even have to worry about this. And that social context that one person might be raised in would result in a massively different socialization. And that massively different socialization, why aren't you saying that therefore they aren't men?
Because that has nothing to do with their sex.
What do you mean?
I mean, how does them getting spied on have anything to do with their experience as a man?
Because the
Like,
proclivity for men to be seen as violent and therefore greater necessity for them to be spied on.
what? What do you what?
Men are perceived as more violent, are they not? Compared to women.
Yeah, certainly.
And therefore there was a lot of men who were Middle Eastern or what have you that were harshly treated, unjustly probed by intelligence agencies and what have you, that
Okay, yeah, sure.
on the
And
basis
no
of
one.
them being a Middle Eastern man with that excess context.
Yeah, okay. So I still don't understand, because they're still so they're being treated as men, right? So they're having that they're they're literally
I'm on
they're
to the
literally
right.
having the same shared experience of being a man. They're being profiled because they're being a man, right? So that's common.
Yeah.
I mean, the proclivity to violence that transcends all, races, right?
Hmm.
So I'm not sure how, like, I'm not sure what point you're making in that
So
regard.
then, by that argument, wouldn't you just make a passing argument then that this Jubilee person is a man because they pass as a man and because they're actively being treated as a man? Would that be your argument?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Would this Jubilee person be a
Who's
man because they're passing as a man?
Are you talking about from the video? Because I just tuned in. I
Okay,
haven't
so
watched.
there's a trans man on the video, and nobody, it seemed like, recognized that they were a trans man. I don't know if they knew or not, but the person passes well. Would you say that that person, anybody who passes well, who most people would consider a man or a woman or whatever, when they were not assigned that at birth, would you say that that person is the gender that people assume that they are?
No.
Why? By that
Well,
argument that you gave earlier, why?
because as I said, that's one aspect of that argument, right? Is the so imagine an example of a trans person who nobody knows is trans, right? So they're completely 100% passing, right?
Sure.
Sure, there's still distinct differences. I mean, just biologically speaking, in what experiences they're going through.
Wait, biologically, in what experience are you trying to say that? What do you? Are you trying to say like what estrogen? Or are you? What are you talking about biologically? The experiences they go through.
Yeah, sure. Periods, childbirth.
Okay,
Um,
not all
uh,
women go through childbirth or have periods. So what are you referencing here?
okay, not just because not all women have periods doesn't mean that's not the
Okay,
vast
so then
norm.
if a woman doesn't have a period and doesn't have a child, then would you say they're not a woman?
No, certainly
Okay,
not.
so then that's clearly not how you define women. So try again.
No, because then you're taking it's a bunch of factors that go into it combined, and you can't just exclude one in a certain scenario and say that, oh, hey, look, So if that woman doesn't have kids or a period, sure, they still have the societal upbringing as a woman. They still have a vagina, right?
Okay,
So
so what if somebody doesn't have a vagina then, but is born with all of the chromosomal makeup of a female? Are they not a woman?
say that again. So
What
so
if,
they're born with
yep.
the chromosomal makeup of a female, but they don't have. Well, then they wouldn't have the chromosomal makeup of a female
Well, I
if they
mean
don't
there
have a
can be
vagina.
there can be okay, what if their vagina is well, no, I mean they literally can. There are errors when it comes to these things.
Well, then
But
that wouldn't be the chromosomal makeup of a female. That would be something different.
do you think chromosomes is your entire body? Like,
What
for
do you mean?
instance, if I have a chromosomal makeup of a man, I have to have like, there must grow a penis, or do you think that there can be errors
Okay, you're
in
making
how?
broad. Okay, when you say chromosome makeup, that's a pretty broad statement.
Okay,
Um,
what do you think chromosomes are?
chromosomes are where your genetic information is stored.
Okay, and do you think that therefore that things will necessarily happen always and there can never be errors in how that translates to your body? Like, there can't be errors
Look, okay,
between
look.
chromosome and
Uh, uh, okay. Let me explain this to you. So it's not there. What you're kind of getting at is gene expression versus. It doesn't matter what genes you have, right? It matters what genes are expressed
sure.
to a large degree.
Yeah, I
Um,
would agree with that.
sure, I would hope so. But if you have XY versus XX, right? If you have XX, you're never gonna be able to express, the Y gene. So um, you have to have the genetic makeup for it, and you have to express it. But if you don't have the chromosomes for it, you're not ever going to be able to express it. So, I
So
like.
wait,
So
what are you referencing? What are you
I'm
referencing
saying,
when you're
okay.
trying to
So
bring this into play? What is the I want to hear. So the problem is, from you, there are men and women that have such radically different socializations growing up that I
mhm.
need you to justify and suss out for me right now, what is that societal teachings or whatever that a woman needs to go through in order to be a woman. Because I've already shown you that there are many women that don't have even a uterus, so they don't have the capacity to be able to to have a kid or anything like that. So I need you to suss out for me this societal argument. What is the societal argument you're making that women must undergo this very specific socialization, otherwise they're not a woman?
It's not one. That's the thing. It's not one specific thing. It's a whole collection of things that
Okay, so then
women experience that are different.
let me put it this way, right? What are your
It's not like
let me try a different method. What is your biological arguments that a woman needs to be a woman?
to be a woman, to have female reproductive organs and genetics. I mean,
What is the
genetics
genetics?
make up a female, and you know,
What is the genetics?
the chromosome, the XX chromosome.
The XX chromosome. So they need to have an XX chromosome and a vagina, is your argument. So you've shifted away then from periods and childbirth. That's no longer a necessity. You are now at the position that you need a vagina and the XX chromosome in order to be a woman.
No, I never said that you needed to have a period to be a woman. I said that was that's an experience that's a woman will have that
Okay,
a trans woman will not
that
have.
was my bad because when I asked you for what makes a woman, you seem to have said that. So I'm not sure if you misheard the question, but I assume that you didn't. So
Well, I mean that is a common denominator for a large majority
it's a
of
good
women.
thing that's not what I asked you. What I asked you is what made a woman a woman. So that's the reason why
Okay,
I
what
came
makes
to the
a woman a woman? Okay,
Yes.
sure. Having XX chromosomes.
Okay.
I mean that's really it. I mean that
So
that that's
if I
that's
show you
the
somebody,
basis,
so if I, because you know there's more than two sexes, right?
of course.
Okay, so I can show you somebody that passes entirely as a woman, even has a vagina that doesn't have an X chromosome. Would you say that person isn't a woman?
That doesn't have an XX chromosome.
Yes. You know
And they
that those
pass the
people.
woman.
Yes.
No, they have a penis, right? Or is that what you're
No.
saying?
There's more than two sexes, buddy. Was there like 7 recognized? You can have a vagina and pass entirely as a woman and not be XX.
You can have a vagina with XY chromosomes. Is that what you're telling me?
What do you think? Hold on. What do you think sex is in reference to this conversation? Because you seem to be thinking there's only two sexes.
When did I ever say that there was two sexes?
Because this is the 3rd time now that you say that you need it with you have a vagina with XY. I'm not saying that it's just with XY. I'm saying that there's multiple different sexes that make up more chromosomal makeups than XX or XY.
Sure. Yeah. You can have people with all sorts of reproductive organs.
Yeah,
right.
and that can pass that can pass perfectly. Well, not even necessarily fitting on the X or XY.
This is such a common argument, and it's bullshit because those are such fringe cases that aren't true for the majority of trans women.
The reason, so when we make
rules, those are extremely rare, and that's so dissociated from what you're saying that it has no bearing, because when you say trans women are women, you're not saying someone who has this specific chromosomal makeup. I
agree. I agree. And when you say that somebody is a woman on the street, you're not referring to their chromosomal makeup. But I think you're trying to post hoc your way into doing something that makes you feel a little bit more comfortable with something that would otherwise make you feel uncomfortable. That's my opinion. All right.
Well,
because I think it would make you feel uncomfortable to call trans women women at this point, because I think you're trying to back up so much away from this idea that they could be women when earlier you were talking about, well, I guess a gender could be whatever they feel like is their gender. And when I say okay, then you would say that I can change my gender, and you're like, yeah, sure, but you wouldn't be a woman, you would be a trans woman. You didn't really have an excuse for why I couldn't also just refer to them as women in contexts where it wasn't relevant that I distinguished that they were trans. Similar to there are contexts where it isn't relevant to distinguish whether or not a black man is a black man or just a man in the room.
I'm sure there's context. Yeah, obviously there's context where it's not relevant. But I mean, if you have to make that distinction, I mean, like it's
You have to make the distinction for black men as well. We constantly have to distinguish between black men, white men, Middle Eastern men, Asian men, Indian men. We have
and they're all men, right? They're all men.
And just like how you said earlier, under your definition of being able to pick your gender, right? That those people, like the people who go out of their way to say, trans women are being obtuse, when in many circumstances it's not necessary to distinguish, and in some circumstances it is necessary to distinguish. For instance, if we're talking about perhaps how you were raised, how you were socially how you were socialized as a kid. That's going to be relevant when we're talking about gender, to distinguish between trans women and cis women. Sure. Yeah. But in most contexts, like this Jubilee video, when we're just talking about generally, hey, this is what the men are picking, the men in this Jubilee video are based, it's not relevant to go, yeah, the men in this Jubilee video is based. And that includes the trans men.
Let me ask you, how many contexts do you think there are where it's not important to distinguish?
The vast majority of contexts.
Okay, like what?
Like, for instance, hey, there's a man over there.
Hey, there's a man over there.
Yep. Do you see that man over there? You see that guy? The mailman that's coming in? How often do I need to just... It's usually only when I'm making precise claims about somebody's, like, personal lived experience, which isn't incredibly common, that I would do this. No, because I would just say, hey, this Jubilee dude? And that would be it. And the only reason why I use that is to be able to distinguish that I am talking about the things that we would arbitrarily consider manly or man-esque, usually in reference to a passing argument. That's usually the utility, usually.
Sure, yeah, okay. Can you give me another example? Where you would say where you would just say man, right?
Mailman.
What?
The mailman.
What are you talking about, bro?
There's mailmen. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What? Yeah.
I wouldn't say trans mailman. What do you mean? I wouldn't say trans mailman. Oh yeah, my trans mailman. I would just say my mailman.
Okay. What? Yeah. But nobody says like male woman. I mean, so I don't understand what your point is.
Okay,
you're not making a distinction.
Sure. I mean, I have met people, but I know it's not incredibly
common. That's
so. Let's say delivery guy.
Delivery. Okay. You're literally just using titles.
Yeah, I'm using the way that normal people speak. The delivery guy dropped off a package for you today.
Yeah.
The DoorDash guy dropped off something for you.
So you're yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
this is the way that 99% of people speak 99% of the time in their life.
Yeah. What's your point?
My point is, the vast majority of the time, it's not going to be relevant to distinguish between them being a trans man.
No,
you're
speaking in the context of describing someone in a public situation. Okay, that is one situation that you're describing.
Then let's try the inverse. How can you give me a couple quick examples of where it would be necessary for me to point out that this person's a trans man?
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Say you're in a bar, and you see a trans man or trans woman or whatever, and if they're talking to someone of the opposite sex, then it would be pertinent to let them know that they are trans, right? That is a pretty...
Why would you get up in there? Why wouldn't you just leave them to their adult and let them disclose that themselves?
Oh, okay. I mean for themselves. If they're talking themselves to someone in a bar, right?
Why?
Okay.
Why would you let?
I'm speaking in a romantic sense. Okay, that's an example in a romantic sense.
You should disclose. Yeah, I think that's pretty. I think that's pretty cringe. I feel like they can.
I think disclosing that you're trans is cringe.
No, I never said that. You said a separate party. You see somebody trans talking to another person, and you go over there to disclose that for them. Let them do that on their own. They can suss that out.
Okay, sure, but they should do that on their own, right? So that's an example.
Yeah, sure. If they're in a romantic setting, sure, I would agree.
Sure. Okay. What about with their doctor? What about with health purposes?
Sure.
Yeah, with medications.
Okay, you got any others? Because those are like the only two that examples that even I gave previously. Do you got any others?
What do you mean?
When
Any
you're
other
romantic,
examples where I want
so
to?
if you're meaning to tell me that it is incredibly important that we not call trans men or trans women women because you might go to the doctor's office and for when you're dating somebody, and therefore it is important that we never call them women or men respectively, we have to call them trans men and trans women. You don't have very much of a case, because I hate to break it to you, the vast majority of human experiences do not include questing and going to the fucking doctors that you do annually.
Okay, and I'm not saying that we have to make the distinction solely because of that. I'm saying that if you have to make a distinction to begin with, then they're obviously not the same thing.
No, this is hold on. This is ridiculous. Okay, because I could say the same thing about black women and black men, because there are many black women, or sorry, more specifically, there are many black men that might be worried about dating white women or Asian women or whatever, and I have to go, hey, look, just so you know, buddy, this chick's white. And you go, oh, like, would that mean that they're not the same? Just because information could be relevant to a group of people as to whether or not they would continue interacting with the people, and the socialization that they undergo might be relevant to interacting with people, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden they aren't in the same category. Right? Well, there was people on Twitch debating as to why black men didn't have to date white women, and that wasn't racist, right? There's a massive group of people that have very specific dating criteria, and for you to say that, like, oh yeah, you know what, because I have to distinguish between a trans woman and a cis woman when it comes to dating, therefore they can't be called women, is, I think, fucking ridiculous. Because the same thing applies for a lot of people's dating habits. Maybe they just don't say it in front of you, but a lot of people care about the of people that they date. I don't know what to say. A lot of people have racial preferences when it comes to dating, right? So like if my guy is well known for really liking Asian women or whatever, and then I know this chick is Asian that he's talking to, or maybe he's talking to 3 different people and one of them's Asian, I give him a nudge. I'm like, hey, by the way, that chick is Asian. He's like, hey, listen, say less, king, right? And that's the end of the day. Is all of a sudden Asian women not the same as other women? Like, this is ridiculous. Because you make a delineation does not mean they're not amongst the group.
Okay, I mean, it does though, because so from my perspective, you're saying that woman is an overarching category, and in that you distinguish between cis and trans women, right? Am I correct in saying that?
Where it is pertinent, correct. And like, I'm not a cringe lord that's gonna go, by the way, like, if you want to soy out and become one of those leftists or whatever that say, you know, this Asian woman, this, like, for instance, on my screen, this black woman needs to speak, okay? The black woman, let the black woman speak. If you want to do that, then go about living your life in that cringe way. I don't want to, just let the chick speak. Right? That's what it is. If you want to go full, you know, blue hair SJW, you can be about that business and it'd pull your way to the top. I don't like doing that. Okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to say only when it's pertinent that I bring up the fact that they're black, or only when it's pertinent am I going to bring up the fact that they're trans. And I'm just, hate to break it to you, there isn't very many contexts. Pretty much the only 2 very realistic ones that you're going to find is dating and going to the doctors. That's it. And that's not even close to the majority of interactions people have on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, I mean, it's okay.
Also, I want it noted, in dating, you only need to do it once. It's not like you need to constantly refer to somebody as a trans man. You can a trans person can talk to their person that they're prospective for dating and be like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm trans, and then that virtually doesn't ever have to come up again.
What does that have to do with anything?
What that has to do?
The frequency of it doesn't exclude it.
You made a frequency argument. You made the argument that, like, it is incredibly important that we consistently delineate between trans women and cis women because their societal upbringing is so dramatically different that we need to do it. And no, in the vast majority of contexts, it doesn't fucking matter.
Not seeing enough in chat.
Like, okay, but I would be, in most people's lives, they will never have to do it.
Really?
Yeah, they won't have to do it. Yeah, in most people's lives. Trans people are not that...
They won't have to do what?
They won't have to delineate the difference between a trans woman and a cis woman. Unless we're talking about in news media and they're responding to like J.K. Rowling talking about turf, then sure. But I'm talking on a day-to-day basis.
If that is so true, then what's all the fucking hubbub about, you know, trans women are women? If it's not a fucking issue, why is that such a fucking topic of
What
debate?
are you talking about? What's not an issue?
Why is there a push to say that trans women are women then?
What?
Okay, what is the point in saying that trans women are women? Is what I'm thinking.
The point, honestly, from my perspective, from my personal perspective, is honestly a bit selfish. I really like having these conversations. I think it engages in pretty decent level philosophy, and I think it can tell whether or not somebody's critically thinking or not. So that's why I like having it, and genuinely just to figure out whether or not somebody's actually smart enough to get through these problems on their own. So that would be my point. If you're talking about like the broad movements point, it's probably to make trans people's lives better while also being scientifically accurate. So pushing a message that it is so science. You understand the scientific community delineates the difference between sex and gender, right? And it recognizes that trans people can transition their gender, correct?
Sure.
Therefore, trans people would be women because the word woman is a gender, not a sex.
There's I mean, you can use it as a gender and a sex, so it depends what context.
In reference to the current medical consensus, trans women are women in reference to gender, right? Because when we're talking about sex, we're talking about female and male, right? And they recognize that. So a trans woman is a woman because woman is a gender. Female is a sex, not woman. And the scientific community is very big on using specific terms. And that's the terms
then
that they
are
use.
Trans females females?
No.
No? So trans females aren't.
Probably not. Unless do we want to get
all right.
Hold on. Do we want to get into like
So trans women are women, but trans females are females. Okay, so there's the distinction.
Unless we want to get into that, unless we want to get into the arbitrary nature of sex, then we can do that. But for the most part, I'll just grant that I don't want to have that conversation. So I'll just grant it no. Like changing your sex is a completely arbitrary thing that many people haven't even really dove into what allows you to change your sex.
Okay. So here's the problem, right? When people hear trans women are women, and I'll say at least from my perspective, I'm not thinking gender. I'm thinking you're talking about sex. Okay. And so,
buddy, why do we call them transgender?
Okay, you can also call them transsexual. So
that's actually a dated term. We do not. So you're
dated from what, 5 years ago? Come on, man.
Well, if you're talking about if we're talking about memes, if we're talking about like 4chan memes, then yeah, it's up to date. But if we're talking about actual scientific, if we're talking about, because you want to keep in the science, right? We want to keep it above board. We're talking about science. That ain't it, and it's been that way for a minute.
I mean, I haven't really followed those studies that much, so I can't comment on the science.
Okay, so the science very clearly delineates, and then the big excuse that a lot of conservatives like to give is that the in academia is brainwashed or whatever. So it's just
academia is pretty.
Okay, so it's when it does things you don't like, but it's really, really based when it's like when you're talking about chromosomes. This is my problem. You can't pick and choose with science. You either like it or you don't.
No, look, speaking as someone who is in academia, right? I'm a biochemist and a pharmacologist. Okay, I'm a scientist, right? I am very familiar with academia, and there's a lot of liberal persuasion in academia.
Is there?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, if you go to college right now, you're forced to take multiple diversity classes, and some of those classes they say some off the wall.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. How about a professor saying I could fail all white people in this class for being white, and it wouldn't be racist?
That's probably accurate, and that's a problem. I don't think there's anything wrong with pointing out that there are problems in our society.
Okay. So
I would need the context for this, because like I would make a point like that. It is cringe that a professor could do that and not be racist. That is cringe. So I would need the excess.
I don't agree with that it wouldn't be racist, but I mean that's a whole nother can of worms.
No, they're referring to in the example you would need excess context, because if they were referring to it not being seen as racist, they would be accurate and it would be cringe, and they could be making a point out of that. That's the thing.
Wait, you don't think people would see that as racist?
No, absolutely not. I think there's a lot of people that would not see that as racist, unfortunately.
So if a black professor, okay, I mean I guess it doesn't even matter if he's black or not, but in this case he was black.
So hold on, let me slow you down right now, because I can already tell you are being so obtuse you don't realize I'm agreeing with you. You are already missing the point so much you don't realize I'm agreeing with you.
No. I absolutely understand. Okay, well, I understand to an extent. But what I'm picking at here is that you're saying that it wouldn't be seen as racist.
It would not be seen as racist by a lot of people, and that's a problem that we need to fix.
Okay, now
wow.
Okay,
so yeah, you didn't understand what it was. Okay, so like I just want you to try your best to listen to the points that I'm making. So in reference to the trans people, let's get back on track. Right? In reference to trans people, scientific consensus seems to show pretty clearly there's a difference between sex and gender. This makes sense because there is nothing materially in the world that says that females have to wear high heels, makeup, and have specific long hair or wear dresses and things like this. When we're talking about gender and stuff, we're talking about certain specific either performances or even attitudes that we carry about ourselves or about what other people are expected to do, usually on the basis of the way that they look. That's what we're talking about, right?
Sure.
When we're talking about these things, it would just be it's the de facto understanding of a lot of people that we would want to broaden the scope of these things in order to maximize the utility of the individual people in society, essentially. And I don't know why you would be against that. If somebody born with a penis wants to wear a dress, I don't know why you would cringe out about that. Like who the cares?
Who cares? Exactly. I don't take issue with it. I take issue with trying to blur the line between trans women and women, because
what do you mean blur? What do you mean blur the line? Who is trying to blur the line in what way?
By calling them both women, you're blurring the line between a trans woman and a cis woman. You're putting them into one label that.
Why should I not? Why should I not? Give me the reason why I shouldn't.
Why you shouldn't? Because just strictly from definitional speaking, I mean they're not the same. Why would you use the same definition?
No, hold on. You appealed to the scientific consensus before, unless you want to go back on that. Scientifically, they would be the same by our current scientific consensus. Genders. Yes, gender. We're not speaking about sex. We're not talking about sex. We made this delineation at the beginning of the talk. We're not talking about sex.
Yeah, but when you say trans women are women, people aren't. That's like saying, people who take issue with that, and the people who say that you can't change your gender, there's not like a 1-to-1 correlation with that. So that, I mean, what I'm saying is that you can recognize that you can change your gender, right? Obviously not like willy-nilly, but sort of as your experiences evolve. But when you say trans women are women, I would say that the majority of people think that you're talking about sex. Someone who has transitioned, had surgery, and
I would just say those people don't. Yeah, those people like to LARP about them caring about scientific definitions and understandings. It's not people care.
LARPing. I would sure say that's the majority of people.
Okay, so you understand, in order to say that, you have to misunderstand the definition of woman, correct? From a scientific perspective. No, colloquially, it works. Woman and female are work interchangeably. Scientifically, that is not the case.
Okay, so I'll try this way. If you have to know about these scientific studies and all this extra context behind it, what's the utility in just making that blanket statement when most people don't know that stuff?
Because it's scientifically accurate. And because it helps people live their material lives. Like, it just helps. I don't know why.
I don't think it does. When has that ever helped anyone, saying a trans woman is a woman?
Because it helps trans people feel more valid in their gender identity.
It helps them feel more valid.
Yeah, that
Okay.
makes people feel better. Yeah.
Saying trans women are women. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
I mean,
not just
I'm
saying
all
it. Not just saying it. It includes the actual backing behind it being solidly defendable from a scientific and moral perspective. It's not
sure.
just
So
like
just to
just saying the
appease
word.
the feelings of trans women, right? That's an argument in itself. But look,
I don't like
if
the
a
framing
trans,
of that
why not?
because it's not just to appease them; it's also to be scientifically accurate. It's just
Mm,
it's the more accurate claim that just when we're talking about women, we're talking about in the context of gender. When we're talking about men, we're talking about in the
I
context of
mean,
gender.
it's more
And it just makes
accurate
it.
in like the well, actually sense. It's like it's so. I mean,
I mean, buddy, I hate to break it to you. You know, for a long time the Earth was flat, and then when we decided that wasn't the case, there was a lot of actuallys that had some actuallys that really didn't vibe with the general public for a while. Yeah, like the whole our understanding of the modern world is built on those actuallys. As much as I do think that they're cringe, yeah, unfortunately, it is the way that it works.
and that it's different because this is social sciences we're talking about, and that's empirical data that can
Okay, so
show
then
that.
if you want to talk about the social sciences, let's talk about the actually people that were like, actually black people are human and not apes. Like, what do you mean? Like, are we just doing that to appease black people? Come on, man.
Okay, I mean that's a
Dude,
pretty
you're a scientist. I shouldn't have to tell you why actuallys are important. I thought you just told that you were a scientist and you're like, dude, I don't know that nerd actually. Like, bro, what?
no. My point was that it's just it's kind of like you're taking a very strict uh s- definition of the word that's separated from the common use of that word, right? So that's why I'm saying actually, because it's almost like a very specific nitpick that's divorced from what the word is actually used as on a broader basis.
That
Okay,
doesn't matter because it's scientifically
yes, it
accurate.
matters.
No, it doesn't. It's not relevant. If we're talking scientifically, it's not relevant at all. They don't go, "Hey, listen, guys,
Yeah, no,
we would totally make this like accurate claim, but the problem is
sure.
people use a word for something that it shouldn't be, so like we can't do it." It's like,
No,
"Oh, fuck, man,
you're
we
absolutely
got."
you're absolutely correct in that regard. But I would say that in order to that work, you would have to have most people be under the assumption that they're talking about the gender, not sex, and I just don't think that holds up
Yeah,
when you say
I
trans
think
women
for a
are
lot
women.
of people, it's going to include trying to make the argument that sex and gender are different. I think for a lot of
Yeah.
people, that's
Okay.
it.
So let
But
me
wait, hold
explain.
on. I want to make I want to bring out the fact that we had already established this at the beginning when you
Hmm.
said that you don't believe that you could change your sex, but you could change your gender. And at the very beginning, I was like, okay, that's all that trans people. You accept trans people because trans people are only about changing gender. That's what they're about.
Trans people are only about changing gender.
Yeah, for the for the most part, yeah. I would say I guess
Yeah.
you could point to some fringe cases, but for the most part, like the vast majority of trans people, it's about gender. It's not they're not saying that they're female.
Okay. Yeah. If you're saying that, I would agree with you. But I would say that, but saying trans women are women does not come across as speaking just about them
Okay,
changing their
but
gender. And I would say that all it does is serve to sort of create this point of contention that it's just causing friction, and it's kind of like
what would you say then in response to that? Because they are women. I thought you were a man of science, so I thought you would agree with being able to properly distinguish with accurate precision the truth of a claim. So, which I care very much about. Tip
sure.
tip hat, and that's has to do with like, hey, yeah, trans women are women by the definitions we have set up. Not only in society, it is consistent with our understanding of gender performance and all of that. So like, yeah, trans women are women by our own very metrics. They would be. It's
Yeah,
just that
I
our
mean, I
colloquial
just think
use
that
of a word just doesn't work very well, and I have to tell people that like colloquially it doesn't work that way. So if you're, I don't know what the issue is. I'm talking to a dude that says that he's a scientist. I don't know why I can't be scientific with my vernacular.
you can be scientific. I'm not a social scientist. I mean, it's
It doesn't.
that's
I would assume that you practice with precise terms nonetheless, correct?
Yeah, how you can't have. Okay, look, like I said, I'm not a social scientist, but when you speak about precision in social sciences, uh, I'm a little dubious about that because how are you going to necessarily have anything definitive if it's a social science because it's so fluid, right? It's not. There's no. I don't know. To me, it's just like you can't be like 100% definitive, right?
Well, I mean, you can't be 100% definitive with pretty much anything, but I know what you mean. You can't be nearly as definitive with social science as you can the hard science, but when it comes to terms that we arbitrarily label in the first place, I think you can be. For instance, we would all agree that Harry Potter, the book, exists, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Right? But we're using words which are ultimately arbitrary. We agree on that, right? To be able to come to that delineation. So, like, just because they're arbitrary doesn't mean that, like, they don't have some kind of innate meaning or thing that they map onto reality with, which is that there is something that we are mutually describing and that we have cognitively understood as gender, and that we are mutually coming to an understanding that trans people fit within.
Sure. Look. I think the main point of contention here is that when you say trans women are women, in reality, what at least I'm interpreting it as is saying trans females are females, and I think on a large,
Okay, I don't
to a broader audience that holds true.
I won't disagree with you.
So it's like if you're gonna say trans women are women, it's like. I mean, it's just kind of like a contentious like little catchphrase. You have to really back it up with you have to back it up with a lot of stuff.
All I have to do is submit that anybody who's scientifically who cares about science at all, I can submit the fact that scientifically we recognize gender as being separate from sex, and then boom, that's it. I thought you, as somebody who was a man of science, honestly, I wouldn't expect you to use an improper term and to the point in which you would come in here in the first place, where you misinterpreted the word woman with I don't know, is this the first time you're hearing that women or gender is separate from sex scientifically and the consensus is out on that? Is this the first time you're hearing that?
Look, man, you have to realize that these conversations are sort of in a bubble in this
yeah, I know that.
So as someone who's not a part of that bubble, I mean, to an outsider, it's pretty distinct. Yeah. So okay. So you're saying that women you're speaking of a gender, right?
Yeah. The word woman is a gendered term because it is referring to gender. That is the accurate scientific way to use woman. I would never say woman for female. It doesn't make sense, and it's just not precise.
Okay.
If I'm trying to be precise. Of course, colloquially, I might use it because... Okay. But like if somebody is talking about something where it matters, like we were talking about before, where the delineation matters, right? Where the delineation matters, we would draw a distinction between these two. So if somebody comes forward to me, I don't know, like women have XX chromosomes, I will pull the actually, and I'll be like, well, like if we're trying to talk with precision, scientific precision, we're talking about females. Is what we're talking about, right? Because we're talking about scientific precision.
Sure. This is similar to what I think is the issue with CRT. I mean, people are having two different debates because people are thinking you're talking about sex, right? Instead of gender.
Sure. I think there's a problem with a lot of people conflating the two in general. It doesn't seem like you were conflating the two as much as you were thinking that I was talking about sex. I think there's a large problem with people thinking that gender and sex are the exact same thing. I think there's a bigger problem with that than there is people who think I am talking about sex rather than gender.
I mean, yeah, to be clear, they're not the same thing, but they are, I mean, heavily correlated.
I mean, correlation doesn't really mean anything in this context, right?
I mean, sure, if we're talking, fringe cases. I mean,
yeah. So, but like, even still, the correlation isn't really like. For instance, what if every single cis woman tomorrow became trans? Like, would we say then that like, oh well, there's just, well, that's like, well, there's nothing there anymore. Like, what does that information give? What predictability, what prediction power does that statement give us? It's not really anything, right?
Wait, sorry, what?
Because there is a correlation currently between cis women being cis, i.e. assigned female at birth, like being a female, and then, becoming, or being a woman. That doesn't really give us very much predictive capability if we're talking about, potentially that swapping to be the case. Like, what does that really tell us, besides there's a fair chance that people are going to be a woman if they're a female? Like, I'm just not sure.
That's exactly what it tells you.
Yeah, but how's that useful?
What do you mean, how is that useful? I mean, if it's true for 99% of all people, then I would say it's it's pretty apt descriptor.
Well, sure, but we generally make descriptors of things that we find use for. I just don't know what the use for this would be.
The use for
that descriptor.
For sorry, what descriptor? For saying that
just more often than not, females are assigned are women. Because we're not at a point where we're even comfortable diving into, like, hey, a bunch of people, it's okay to be trans and
how
shit
is that
like
not
that.
Useful?
Well, it's how would it be?
Why? Okay, why is it useful to say it's not? I mean,
I don't think I need a reason to say something isn't useful. It just doesn't currently readily appear to me to be very useful.
Okay.
My bad.
I would say, okay, it's useful in the context of your trans debates, right? If you're talking about trans.
Yeah, sure. It could be useful inside of these specific contexts, sure.
Just because your mom
outside of that, it's not useful because nobody doesn't think about it because this is a bubble we're living in here.
Yep, I don't disagree with that. We live in a bubble.
So yeah, I mean, it's not useful because it's just taken for granted.
Yep. Sure.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would agree. No arguments for me on that one.
Okay. All right. So, all right, buddy. All right, is there anything else you wanted to say to me?
Nah, man. I'll just end with saying that I don't think there's any utility in saying that trans women are women.
You don't think there's any utility?
I would say that the only utility that comes from that would be to sort of massage the feelings of trans women to make them
when
feel
you talk
better.
About massaging the feelings of people, why wouldn't you take that more seriously? Comes to, so, like, we have a group of people that we just agree to have a scientifically accurate understanding of gender versus sex, right? And that they are adhering well within their scientific boundaries to be able to do so. They're scientifically accurate. They're actually, or whatever we want to reference it into something accurate, and they wish for support along that journey. What's the issue with that?
There's no like my point is that I would, if I'm around a trans woman, then sure, if they want me to call them a woman, sure, I'll say it to be nice to them, but just in my head, it's hard to separate female from woman, right?
But you agree that it's accurate, nonetheless, that they would be a woman, right?
Assuming those studies that you're talking about are valid. I mean,
do you want the a WHO or something talking about gender? You're talking about the fact that current scientific consensus is that gender and sex are different.
To be honest, I really don't feel like digging through all that shit, so I'll just take you at your.
Okay. So if we assume it, if we assume it, right? Then wouldn't you say that your feelings there would be out of line with the material reality? And that perhaps we should do better to get most people's feelings in line with the material reality?
You would have to change the colloquial use of the term women.
Yeah.
And so until that's changed, I mean, I really don't see.
It's not about whether or not it would be realistic. It's about whether or not you would be inaccurate when you feel as though you are justified in believing that the person really isn't a woman.
Yeah, but the thing is, you wouldn't, when you're using it in a colloquial sense, you're not necessarily inaccurate though, because uh, I mean, when you're saying it, you're meaning female, right? So that kind of it holds true that they're not
So
trans.
I actually
Females
don't.
aren't
My
females.
bad. I hit my mic. I don't believe this because in a lot of instances, we would call, for instance, this black woman on my screen a woman, right? That's what we do, right?
Say that again. A black woman. On your,
The person on my stream. This we would call this woman a woman, right? Or we would call Hassan a man, correct?
sure.
Right? Do you think that we are making an appeal to sex, or do you think that we're making an appeal to the things that we visibly see that might be indicative
Right.
of the gender that of which they identify as?
I think that they're intertwined. You're making it appeal to both because when you see them presenting as a male, you're just kind of in your head subconsciously you're lumping them into that category. You're not making a
So
delineation between gender and sex.
my whole thing is we have general things that we because of sexual dimorphism, we have general things that we can visibly see on people that is a signifier of their sex. But usually when we're looking at people, we're not looking at their chromosomal makeup, and we're especially not usually looking at their genitals, right? So we have to make things up based on gendered expression, which is this is what men tend to wear, this is what women tend to wear, this is the way men tend to look, this is the way women tend to look, right? And if you change your gender expression in line with a gender with which that your sex isn't correlated to, right? And so there you go for a reference back to that. Then you will probably end up resulting in people just referring to you as the gender or whatever with which you appear more closely with. And that is accurate for those people. That is what their summation is. You understand?
I think that's very rare.
It may be
speak-
rare, but nonetheless, we can look at the how it can be useful to look at rare instances or extreme hypotheticals, for instance, is to examine how we fundamentally use the principles that we employ in our day-to-day life, right?
Sure, you can do that, but it doesn't necessarily have any utility.
It does, because it examines how we come about our conclusions on a day-to-day basis. And by isolating as many factors as possible through an extreme hypothetical or an extreme analogy,
yeah,
we can isolate variables.
Yeah, sure, you can come up with some philosophical justification or whatever, but most people don't do that. I mean, that's pretty.
And I'm arguing for more people to be more scientifically apt and or at the very
Most people are. There's no. I mean, asking them to engage in this sort of philosophical introspection is not useful at all because most people aren't capable of that. So I don't think there's utility in that.
I think
And-
no. I think most people are capable of that. I think there's just a lot of people who are either lazy or just don't care about the issue enough. Do you think like it's just most people are just like physically incapable, or what do you mean by incapable? Do you just mean they're lazy? Are we agreeing that they're just too lazy to do it, or what do you mean by incapable?
Well, that is certainly one, but also just to be able to engage in that level of introspection, it's not. I don't know. I have pretty low regard of most people. So
Do you
I
think a
don't
lot
care.
of leftists are idiots? Like there's like a lot of like yeah. So if they're capable of doing it, why couldn't the average idiot do it? Who isn't a leftist? You get me?
Because I don't think because that's the problem. I don't think those leftists are engaging
My
that sort of
Discord, not yours.
philosophical. Yeah, I don't think they're engaging that sort of philosophical introspection. I think that they're a lot of them. You know, they're kind of getting these. They're hearing these ideas and just kind of going with it. They're not really doing the level of analysis that you're explaining. It's party politics, right? A lot of people in these are taking up like broad positions based on what party they're aligned with. I don't think they're doing any sort of really, philosophy.
I'll agree with you. There is a large amount of them that I would agree with, but that I would say that your descriptor is apt for. But I think for a lot of other people, it's not. I think a lot of other people absolutely got down this because I don't think it takes. I think what it primarily takes is a desire to do it. I think that's what it takes. And I think there's not a lot of people that desire to do it because it's just not high up on their priority list. They care about a whole host of other things, and that's just the end of it.
Right. So, I mean, I guess it could have some utility for you or someone who's interested in that, but on a broader scale, I don't think it has,
Well, I'm trying to
just
get more people interested in trying to improve people's lives, not only because, for one, I agree with you, it may not be super easy for everyone, but I think it, at the very least, can teach you critical thinking skills, which I think is very important for most people to have. That's part of the reason why I said earlier, philosophically, a lot of this is a philosophical thing for me, because I think it is a very good litmus test to the critical thinking capabilities of a person. I think it's one that brings us closer to better solutions for a large group of people, well, relatively large, as a percent of the population, not very many, but in absolute numbers, a large
yeah,
group
no,
of
sure.
people.
As a thought exercise, yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
not even as a thought exercise. You would change the way that you materially go about your day-to-day life, right? Because ideally, if we agree on the science and we agree on the
I don't think so, because just to be frank, most people don't interact with trans people on their day-to-day life, so I
Oh,
don't think
sure,
it's gonna.
sure. If we want to talk about the probability that you're going to run into a trans person to even have any of this happen, sure, yeah. But if you're talking about that, I thought we were talking about, so like, if you interact with a trans person, though, it'll definitely manifest, because now you recognize that, and you have either the critical thinking faculties, or at the very least, you just have the understanding about the issue that, like, actually, this person is legitimate in their pursuit to becoming a woman, or them being a woman.
I mean, I so you think that engaging that sort of introspection is gonna make someone nicer to trans people, where otherwise they wouldn't have been?
Not necessarily whether or not they'll be nicer to trans people, but just at the very least see them as scientifically legitimate.
I mean, sure, but
So I think there's utility at the very least for yourself, for, like, not you specifically, I'm just saying you broadly, to engage in this kind of thinking, to be able to better your critical thinking. So I don't even disagree.
I agree with that.
So, right. And so I think that even innately there is a benefit to individual people who are even cis to be able to engage in this kind of thinking. But even beyond that, there is a benefit given materially to trans people who are discriminated against, that can, live an easier life knowing that there are more people that accept them as being, the equal and fair citizens.
Yeah, but I would also say that just saying that contentious phrase is kind of stirring the pot, and probably also creating more people who are more resentful at the same time. So I would say that would probably counteract it.
I understand that perspective you might have.
I mean, just look at how riled up the conservative base is about trans people, right? I mean, they're getting riled up because of sort of
and so I'm personally not going to shift my rhetoric so distinctly away from what is accurate, what we, at the very least, you've granted is in this conversation, just as a thing without looking up the shit, you've just granted it to me, being accurate. I'm okay with doing that. I'm okay with being accurate. If a couple of people get upset, I'm okay with that.
Sure, but then you have to recognize that you're doing it out of a thought exercise, and you're stripping away the utility.
It wouldn't be
because it's negated by the sort of
so hold on. I think it is reasonable, your position on that. I do not agree, because I think the vast majority of people, right, don't see a difference between gender and sex in the first place, and they wouldn't be affected if I say something else. So, like, in your mind, what would be the alternative to saying trans women are women?
I wouldn't say it at all.
What would you refer to trans women as then?
To them personally, whatever they want. I mean,
no, broadly. Like, if you were to refer
trans women, I would call it trans women. Yeah.
Okay. I find this really bizarre, because that is just a modifier onto this is like saying I won't call black men men. I'll call them black men. Okay. That's sure. Like you are. Okay, that's not how the English language works.
Okay, let me explain this to you. At least for me personally, I can recognize that there is a difference between women and female, right?
Sure.
But that being said, and this may be irrational, but when I hear women, trans women, I still think you're saying trans female. Now I know it's not what you're saying,
Okay.
but that's just sort of like I said, it might be irrational, but that's sort of where I'm coming from.
Okay.
And so that's my hang up on that.
Okay. I mean,
Really
that's not really like what I'm primarily concerned with is whether or not you believe it is rational. That's what I'm primarily, or whether or not it's coherent scientifically and by your axioms. If you're having trouble like divorcing the idea, I mean, that's something only you can finish the job on. I'm not going to be like, you need to divorce that idea by tomorrow. Otherwise, you're going to lose social
interest in
credit
it
points.
though, because it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have any utility. It's fun for thought, I suppose. But
again,
I mean, and we disagree on that point.
So wait, how does it not provide utility?
Because like we just talked about this. Remember when I was saying that it's sort of sowing this sort of anti-trans sentiment in a lot of people.
But you're referring to public speech when you're talking about the anti-trans sentiment. And
Sure.
Previously, though, you were talking about from your own perspective referring to them as women. So I'm talking about from your own perspective referring to them as women, like in believing that they are women, right? That doesn't affect public speech. You don't have to go through, and because you believe that trans women are women, you don't have to go through and then say like, oh yeah, trans women are women to be able to do a rhetoric thing. Right? I think we should be challenging in our rhetoric and, do like there's a lot of shit that I say that like upsets leftists, a lot of shit that I say that upsets conservatives. I don't give a right? And half the time it can create conversations between people. I just also just don't think that this meets the merit for like something that I think that the negative rhetoric blowback is too much. But you're talking about the belief in yourself that somebody is something. Like is a woman, and whether or not you are right or wrong for having a connection between woman and female, right? You're talking about that. That is different than public speaking and saying trans women are women.
Sure.
So why wouldn't you agree that internally your feelings would be unjust?
I mean, I could agree with that.
But you said earlier that it had no utility for the idea of changing it, like moving away from that thing.
Yeah, because okay, it has no utility because assuming that I did, right? What would the outcome be? Right? And then I start going around saying trans women are women, right?
No.
Is that?
Oh, I see your issue. You're isolating the manifest. I think if people believe in themselves on an aggregate that trans women are women, right, and not that like not just placating trans women, I think conditions will get better for trans people because that's really all they're advocating for.
I don't think that's realistic. To be clear.
Do you don't think it would manifest in people possibly treating trans people better, or specifically treating trans women as women, or trans men as men?
I don't think so.
If people believe that trans women are women and trans men are men, you don't think it'll manifest in them?
No, I don't.
Their actions at all?
To the enough people where it would matter.
Well, hold on. It's not about whether or not it's reached enough people. It's about whether, because that's my problem. You don't want to talk about it in public. I'll talk about it in public. That's my problem, not your problem. What I'm asking is, if enough people believed it, let's say 60%, 70% of the population, right, truly believed it, do you not believe that the material conditions for trans people would get better if people believed this?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last sentence?
If 60 or 70% of the population believe trans women are women and trans men are men, do you not believe that the conditions for trans people would probably get better in the United States?
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, like just calling them a different label.
It's not about, it's the belief, not calling them. Again, it's not placating, it's believing, right? So a trans woman is a woman in your mind, right? Because you've understood the way that it works. It's not just like placating,
right? You're changing the label, but the perspective of that of that person. Just because you say that, oh, they're a woman, you're not gonna associate a different like I said, lived experiences to them. So it's just you're just
Well,
shifting.
I'm
You're
not.
shifting
So,
a
but
label. You're not shifting what you think of them. You're shifting the label that you're applying to them. And I don't. So to be clear, I don't. I mean, that would be nice for them to hear, sure. But outside of that, I don't see
I'm
how it.
referring to a belief, not just of a placation, just saying that they are, right? That they. So in order, in my opinion, right,
Yeah,
in
but
order to
you're
in order to believe that trans women are women requires at least for a lot of people, because we agree colloquially it can be used in a separate way, female and woman can be used interchangeably, it's going to require a divorcing of sex and gender, and that divorcing then can manifest in people understanding that people can take up different gender roles and gender expressions than they currently have. And I think that's a win in and of itself, is separating those two ideas. In it of itself, I think that's a win.
wait. So why? Okay, so why do you think that would be broadly beneficial?
Because like then men and women are going to, even cis men and women are going to be able to like do the things that they want to do more freely, because they don't feel like their gender expression, the things that they wear and buy and things like that, are inherently tied to their sex.
Um, I don't know, man. I think that I really so let me get this clear. You're saying that engaging in that level of thinking to say that a trans woman is a woman, you're actually shifting your mind state into divorcing sex and gender, right?
It depends on how you do it. I agree. If you're placating them, then no, like it's not going to change anything.
Right. So okay, so you're just using this. You think saying this sort of thought exercise is a tool to push people towards that means, right? I mean, wouldn't it be more beneficial to just talk about the science and the difference between gender and sex in general instead of using this sort of I mean thought exercise?
I don't think it's a thought exercise, right? We're talking about real people's situations, and so it's a material thing, but no, I think that I think using real world examples often helps people to be able to understand not only the gravity of the situation, but also be able to avoid some of the things, honestly, that you were saying before, which is just it's fringe cases. Who really cares, right? Because I think if we're just talking in a void about gender and people are just going to say, yeah, nobody really cares that much. There's not very many people doing this or whatever. But if I point to a material thing that a lot of people are familiar with, a lot of people
Okay.
will actually
So
engage with the topic.
if you yeah, okay, I understand. I understand that. So you think that um if you change your mind, say from thinking that sex and gender are uh the same to being different, then this is going to have some tangible
It's going to
effects
have,
on.
at the very least, a correlation with people believing that they can express themselves more freely of the sex they were assigned at birth.
You think so?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it seems to be the case, at least with the leftists that adopt it. Yeah.
I mean, why can't I have the opinion that sex and gender are the same, but I don't give a fuck what anyone wears?
You can.
Or does.
You can.
So,
There's a phenomenal thing in scientific literature that we call a correlation. It's pretty crazy. So I'm talking about the things that correlates with the best outcomes. That's all I give a fuck about, right? And the things that correlate with the best outcomes, I believe, is believing the divorcing between sex and gender, because not only does it improve the living conditions, not only
you're
does
just
it
basing that off some inherent belief, though, right? Right.
Off of the belief that I want people's material lives to be as best as possible for as many people as possible.
No,
yeah.
but you think that people thinking that sex and gender is gonna lead to that, just based
Lead
off
to what?
just off of improved conditions, right? And that's just based off your gut feeling, right?
I would say that's based off of a lot of information that I have, that the opposite hasn't been working, and that it seems like the communities, societies, and cultures that seem to adopt my framework seem to employ better living conditions for these groups of people, for like trans people, and even by and large the gender stereotypes the individual people fall into. Yeah.
So wait, so the communities that engage in that have better conditions, right?
Have better conditions for people to like live in when in regards to
See, when I hear that, I would say that it's not a result of them thinking that sex and gender is different. It's just it's who they are. They're probably more open to being accepting of other people just as a person in general. And so I mean, I would say that they already had that trait, and it wasn't something that was that came about from
you don't think people could develop that trait?
um sure, we can teach acceptance, yeah.
Okay.
Certainly.
And that's what probably my arguments would be. My arguments are less like foo-foo, like let's just like I'm an empath, we should just feel for other people, because I think that is fucking cringe, right? I think that is super fucking cringe. Some people, it works for some people, it actually works for, it seems like a lot of people, weirdly enough, but yeah, my methods are less like that and a little bit more like challenging you on like why you believe the things that you do, right? I could say we should just care for trans people just because they're people. We should just, look out for trans people just cause. But instead, I'm more the type of guy to just be like, yeah, we should just look out for trans people because, like, honestly, even in most people's moral framework, it leads to better outcomes in your own framework than otherwise not doing it. So I just don't know why we would, fucking shit on a percent of the population, like hundreds of thousands of, if you, let's say, care about workers, I don't know why we would shit on hundreds of thousands of workers that we could use to be able to produce usable labor. I don't know why we would do that. I don't.
Sure.
That makes no sense.
Yeah, so I can see a disconnect here. We just have different sort of moral philosophies. I think that you should just be nice to people, like whoever they are or however they present, right? I don't think any of that really matters how you should treat them. And I don't think I think it would be better to teach that than just say that, to try and say that,
So wait,
bring them down
what I'm hearing then is like the line of dialogue that you want to hear is we should be nice to trans people because trans people are people too. You should accept trans women as women because that would be nice, and you should be kind to them.
Why not?
Okay.
Yeah.
If that works for you, maybe you're that type of person. Like I said, a lot of people work that way. I just don't operate that way. I don't like that.
No,
type.
I see what you're saying. I think, at least personally, I think that would resonate with a lot more people who otherwise wouldn't be nice, or
Sure. Yeah.
trans people,
Sure.
as opposed to bringing them down that sort of contentious line of debate.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, like I said, there's a lot of people that operate that way. I just don't like running my shit that way. I think it's incredibly cringe to just say that. I personally don't even believe in just treating people nicely just because. I need to have a reason. My reason happens to be that I find that there is utility in all people and in treating them good on principle. Right? There is utility there, but like so I'm just not really sensible to the argument. You should just treat them better just cause. I'm not just huge on that. It's not something.
Wait, sorry.
That
What's the difference between
the difference?
utility?
Sorry, the difference would be that like I come at it from it is a second order as a result of. So it seems like what you said is your first like principle is to treat people nicely. I don't give a fuck about treating people nicely, right? I don't care. It's a second. The reason why I treat people nicely is because people are more healthy, more productive, and live more fulfilling lives and that which result in better material conditions, better living standards for other people and most people in society as a whole.
So
let me give you an example. If being nice to people resulted in everybody not doing work and not being productive and resulting in essentially like a doomsday clock on society that would result in society collapsing eventually, I wouldn't be nice to anybody, right? I wouldn't be nice to a goddamn person.
That's an interesting line of
right. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about I don't really care about being nice to people. Right? What I care more about is that we have food, we have technology, we have all of these things, so that way we can be in the hopes, right, with the ultimate goal of being at the very least okay, right? I personally don't give a about being nice to people unless it results in people feeling satisfied, right?
Yeah, that's kind of a cynical line of thinking, I think, but yeah.
Sure.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, right. Yeah, man. It was good talking to you. It's pretty interesting little talk we had. But yeah, I just want to say that yeah, I think we should be nice to trans people, but I just don't see any utility in calling them women.
Okay. All right, buddy.
Bye, man.
All right, bye.
See ya.
All right, hold on. I might have something else I need to do.